Well, good morning again. Hey, if you got your Bibles, and I hope you do, flip open to the book of Ruth. Ruth chapter 2 is where we're going to be this morning. Yes, we're finally getting to Ruth chapter 2. Ruth is the 8th book of the Old Testament, or you can just look in the table of contents and you can find it that way as well. As you're turning there, I want to let you in on something that I think is happening in the book of Ruth. And it's not just the book of Ruth, but it happens kind of all throughout the scriptures. But especially in Ruth chapter 2, we see this playing itself out. And I think the best way for me to explain what I'm talking about is to maybe use an illustration, use an example. So I don't know about you, but when I'm watching sports, there's this thing that the networks have started doing that most of the time I like. And it's maybe the best way to say it is like when they do like a split screen. And so like maybe you're watching the football game and all of a sudden like the screen will split and you'll watch what's happening on the field, but then they'll also have a shot of like the offensive coordinator chewing out the quarterback, and like you're getting like two different things. I mean, like they're going on simultaneously, right? The defense is on the field, they're still playing the game, but then it also shows you what's happening over here. Or maybe if you're a golfer, I'm not, but sometimes I'll watch it. But sometimes like if you're watching golf, which you've stooped to a whole new, never mind. If you're watching golf, right, there's sometimes where there will be like, it's like two different guys and one's on the 17th and one's the 18th and it's Sunday and they're both like putting for a birdie or maybe for par, whatever it is, and they split screen it so you can see what's happening and like there's massive ramifications if one of them misses it and one makes it or vice versa. And it's simultaneously showing you both of the screens at the exact same time. That's kind of like what's happening here in the book of Ruth. And again, especially in chapter 2, you're gonna see a couple of different scenes play themselves out. And sometimes it's simultaneously, but the two sides don't know exactly what's going on. So before we jump in too much though, I do this every week and it's just, I feel like I wanna catch us up just because maybe you weren't here last week or maybe you've just slept since then and you've forgotten. So the book of Ruth is about a family who was living in Bethlehem at the time of a famine, and they left. They left Bethlehem and they moved to a land of Moab. We don't have time to get into it, but this was against the will of God, and they land there in the family Elimelech and Naomi, and then their two kids. And they get to Moab, which is like kind of like an enemy nation, and they land there, and then immediately disaster strikes. The husband Elimelech dies, the two boys die, but before they die, they married Moabite women, Orpah and Ruth, and finally Naomi, kind of the matriarch, she hears, hey, like the famine has left the land of Bethlehem, so let me go back. And so the three of them now, the kind of matriarch and the daughter-in-laws, they head back, and then as they're heading back, Naomi says to the daughter-in-laws, hey, you guys should leave. You should go back to Moab. You should go back to your families. And Orpah says, okay, I'm gonna go back. And Ruth, she clings to her. Remember, like, your people, my people, your God, my God, where you go, I'm gonna go. If anything but death separates us, like nothing but it. And so she goes back, and last week we ended with them entering back into Bethlehem. And remember, they were the talk of the town as they enter back in. And now, as we start chapter 2, the story is gonna continue to unfold. We're gonna see the split screen play out. And the split screen is really their story, what's gonna happen with Naomi and Ruth, but also at the same time, you have God's story. What's God doing in the midst of all of this? So let's pick it up, Ruth chapter 2, verse 1. It says, now Naomi had a relative on her husband's side, so on Elimelech's side, and he was a prominent man of noble character from Elimelech's family. His name was Boaz. So remember in chapter 1, it started in the time of Judges, which let us know that this is a very, very dark time in Israel's history, right? In the book of Judges, at the very end, it tells us that everyone was doing what was right in their own eyes, that nobody was actually following Yahweh, following God. But this chapter's essentially kind of saying, but not everyone was bad. Like there were people who honored and feared the Lord. And one of those people, Boaz, immediately in chapter 2, we're introduced. It's as if the author is saying to us, the readers, like, hey, pay attention to this guy. Don't just read it, like he's introduced, like pay attention to this character. But we know that there's a lot of other things going on. But two things that we do know about Boaz: prominent, noble. These are the two words that were used to describe our boy Boaz. Prominent, noble, meaning that he was respected and has a good reputation in the community. Like the word that probably pops to mind when I think of like prominent and noble, like is he had incredible integrity. Like he was a man of his word. What he said was going to come to pass. And then we learn that he was in Elimelech's family. But as we move into verse 2, the author's essentially trying to say, let's not get too ahead of ourselves, because we immediately come back to Ruth. Look at verse 2. It says, Ruth the Moabite asked Naomi, will you let me go into the fields and gather the fallen grain behind someone with whom I find favor? So in the book, there's 5 different times where Ruth is called a Moabite. And I think the author's doing this to like remind us of the difficult situation that Ruth finds herself in. It would be very easy for us as we continue to read, if the author doesn't remind us, to start to think to ourselves like, well, Ruth actually has a pretty good life. Like Ruth actually has things kind of fallen in place for her. It's if to say like, hey, don't forget where Ruth came from. Moabite. Don't forget it. Like it's the author just kind of reminding us. And she asked to go into the fields. So essentially what's happening here is Ruth is going to Naomi and like, hey, can I actually, I want to work. Like I want to go out and do something. Like it's like she's not just sitting around waiting for something to happen. She says, hey, let me go and do something. Let me go and work. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, hang on. Like if Ruth is doing this, what's the difference in what Ruth was doing here and what Naomi and Elimelech were doing when there was famine in the land? Like they're both just trying to provide. Here's the difference. What Ruth is doing here in chapter 2 is actually something that Yahweh God has put in place for his people, which we're gonna see in just a minute. So Elimelech and Naomi, they actually disobey God by leaving Bethlehem in the time of the famine, doing what goes against the scriptures. What Ruth is doing here is actually doing what the scriptures actually command. And it's showing like her grit, it's showing her tenacity, it's showing her guts, like it's showing like where Ruth's faith really lies. It just lets us into a little bit of her character. It's letting us know that, hey, Ruth is willing to take a step of faith, even though she is dependent on someone else. She's gonna be dependent on someone to show her, what did the text say? Favor. To show her favor. See, what Ruth is asking to do is a process called gleaning. And it's a process we're gonna see in the scriptures, and it consisted of gathering like drop grain. So as other people, is like the workers would go about and picking up the grain, if stuff would be left, the gleaners would come behind them and they would pick up. They would kind of collect what was being left. And we see this in the scripture. So this Deuteronomy chapter 24, this is where we kind of see this. God says, it says, when you reap the harvest in your field and you forget a sheaf in the field, don't go back and get it. It's to be left for the resident alien, the fatherless, the widow, so that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hands. When you knock down fruit from your olive tree, don't go back over the branches again. What remains will be for the resident alien, the fatherless, the widow. When you gather the grapes in your vineyard, do not glean what is left. What remains will be for the resident alien, the fatherless, the widow. Remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt. Therefore, I commanding this to you. Or Leviticus chapter 19 says this, when you reap the harvest of your land, you're not to reap the very edge of the field or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Do not strip your vineyard bare or gather its fallen grapes. Leave them for the poor, the resident alien. I am the Lord your God. Here's why this is so important. God has made a way for the poor, the widow, the sojourner, the fatherless to be taken care of. This is the God that we serve. Yes, it required work. Yes, it was hard labor. No, they're not gonna get rich doing this. No, they're probably not even gonna be able to enhance their status in society, but they could survive. They could eat. This was a way for God to provide. Maybe the best, I try to think of an illustration of this in our own culture today, and here was the best that I could come up with, and so if it resonates, great. If it's this didn't land, I apologize. But it would be in our day and age, the idea of picking up aluminum cans. Sometimes you'll see kids going to pick up aluminum cans for just a little extra money, but sometimes you'll see adults that'll be going by and collecting aluminum cans and trying to take them just to get enough. No, you're not gonna get rich off of it, but you might have enough to pay for your food for that particular day. For God, he put this into his law for the people of Israel. Don't collect everything. Part of you owning this field, part of the blessing that I have given to you is for you to be a blessing to others. And this is what Ruth was setting out to do. But here's the problem. Yes, God has put this into law. Yes, we see this in his word, but it doesn't mean that every single one of the landowners is gonna abide by it, right? Just because it's a law doesn't mean everybody's gonna go, oh, man, God said it, therefore, no. Not in our day and age, and for sure not here, right? Remember, during the time of Judges, everyone was doing right in their own eye. This is the type of world that Ruth is living in. So she goes out in hopes to find favor. And she doesn't go out with arrogance. She doesn't go out with a cocky attitude. She goes out with grace and humility. Gleaning was hard work. Gleaning was not something that you hey guys, I'm gonna go out and glean today. Who wants to come? It was really hard work, especially from someone from Moab. So look at verse 3. So she left and she entered the field and gathered the grain behind the harvesters. She happened to be in the portion of the field belonging to Boaz, who was from the family of Elimelech. I love this verse because it's she just so happened, right? The Hebrew reads like this. And her chanced upon the allowed portion of the field of Boaz, as if to say this was no coincidence. This was no chance. This was no, we might say something as luck would have it. This is it's the author's trying to go, this was no chance at all. This was no coincidence. But then it might beg the question, well, why does the author say it like this? Why does the author communicate like this? And the theologian Darrell Bach, he really helps us understand this when he says this. He says, by excessively attributing Ruth's good fortune to chance, he forces the reader to sit up and take notice, to ask questions concerning the significance of everything transpiring. In reality, he's screaming, see the hand of God at work here. The same hand that sent the famine and later provided food is the hand that has brought Naomi and Ruth to Bethlehem precisely at the beginning of the harvest and has now guided Ruth to the portion of the field belonging specifically to Boaz. It's he's saying, chance, there's no such thing. There's no such thing. This is why for us, neighboring is one of our values. We value this. We have 6 different values, neighboring being one of them. And what we mean by neighboring is that where you work, where you play, where you live, you're there with a purpose. You're not there by accident. You're there because God has you there. That's what we mean by neighboring. We want to be a good neighbor no matter where we go. We believe that God has divinely put us in that place. You're not there by accident. God has placed you right there. You're not simply at your job just to get a paycheck. You're not. You think that the house that you live in is a place to lay your head. It's not just that. It's a place to welcome people in. You think that you being good in an activity is there by accident. It's not. God has given you those talents for a specific reason. God is saying to Ruth, there's no such thing as it just so happens. It's no such thing. Because not only did she end up in the field of Boaz, we also learn that he's in the clan of Elimelech, meaning that he's one of the few men who can actually help Ruth and Naomi in the way that they need. He's one of the few people. And then Boaz comes back on the scene. He's back. And he has two different conversations. First with a servant and then with Ruth. Look back at the text, verse 4. Later, when Boaz arrived from Bethlehem, he said to the harvesters, "Lord be with you." And then they replied, "The Lord bless you." Boaz asked his servants who were in charge of the harvesters, "Whose young woman is this?" And the servant answered, "She is the young Moabite." There it is again. The Moabite woman who returned with Naomi from the territory of Moab. She asked, "Will you let me gather fallen grain among the bundles behind the harvesters?" She came and has been on her feet since early morning, except that she rested a little in the shelter. I like that. Look at how the servant speaks about Ruth. One, that she's a Moabite. It's like she cannot let this reputation go. Everywhere she goes, she's known as the Moabite. Any of you been there? Like no matter what, you want to leave the reputation behind. And it's like no matter where you go, you can't. And so sometimes you move or you have to get away just to leave the reputation. And Ruth, it's like she can't quite leave it. But she's also gaining another reputation. She's gaining a reputation of a hard worker, right? She's being noticed for her persistence, for her dedication, for her just hard work in front of others. I mean, did you see what it said? She came and has been on her feet since early morning. It's as if the author's trying to tell us, hey, those of us who profess Yahweh as Lord, we're gonna be the most diligent, we're gonna be the most hardworking, we're gonna get after it. We're not gonna make work our God, we're not gonna put it over Yahweh, but we are gonna work hard. We're gonna be diligent in what God has called us to do. So if you're a lawyer, you work as hard as you possibly can to be the best lawyer you possibly can be. Yahweh first, and then you work hard when you're at work. If you're an accountant, then you want to be the hardest working accountant there. God first, but when you're there, you're wanting to be the best accountant. This is what we're seeing here. People are noticing the work ethic of Ruth. And then Boaz turns and has a conversation with Ruth. Verse 8. And Boaz says to her, "Listen, my daughter, don't go and gather grain in another field, and don't leave this one, but stay here close to my female servants. See which field they're harvesting and follow them. Haven't I ordered the young men not to touch you? When you go thirsty, go and drink from the jars the young men have filled." Man, when other landowners might take advantage of Ruth, Boaz goes above and beyond. I mean, did you see what he says to Ruth? Stay in my field. Stay close to my female servants. No one is gonna touch you. When you're thirsty, you don't have to be the one that goes and gets the water like most in your shoes. You go get the water that's already been drawn. It's incredible what Boaz is doing. And Ruth, hearing this, can barely contain herself. I mean, do you remember back in verse 2 when she says, "Let me gather grain behind someone with whom I find favor"? Boaz is the answer to that prayer. But here's the truth. Based on Ruth's reactions, what she said in verse 2, she actually didn't think was gonna come to pass. I mean, have you ever said something that you hope comes true, but deep down you really don't believe it to be true? This is Ruth. Maybe I'll find someone whom will have favor on me. I don't know if it's possible, but maybe. Boaz is that person. She has been shown grace in the most difficult of circumstances, in the most difficult of situations. She's had someone that has looked at her in her worst and said to her, "I got you." Doesn't this sound familiar? I mean, isn't this what we see Jesus doing for us in the New Testament? Isn't this what he says to us? In your worst, I died for you. When you have nothing to offer, I died for you. When you had nothing going for you, when everyone else ran away, when everyone else didn't want to touch you with a 10-foot pole, I was there waiting. You might be a foreigner, you might be prone to wonder, you might have nothing to offer, but Jesus is saying, my grace is sufficient for you. My grace is abundant. My grace will last forever. See, what we see with Boaz, how he is treating Ruth, he's like a Christ figure because we see Jesus doing the very same thing for you and for me. It's like it's too good to be true, right? Like, did I really find someone who's gonna show me favor? Jesus, are you really saying that there's nothing I can do to earn salvation? That what you did on the cross, you did it all? That it's by grace that I've been saved through faith in you? Nothing that I can do? Yes. Which means that in your worst, Jesus is still right there. He's still right there. But I wonder if we will respond to Jesus the same way that Ruth responds to Boaz. Look at verse 10. It says, she fell face down, bowed to the ground, and said to him, why have I found favor with you, so that you would notice me, although I'm a foreigner? Ruth, over and over and over again, shows that character. What have I done? What have I done that you would notice me? I don't know about you, but sometimes my response to Jesus is more like, why have you not noticed me? Look at all that I'm doing. Look at how I was acting. It's like, that's my response. It's like, how could you not notice me? Look at what I'm doing for you. Did you notice what I did there? That was like a 23% tip. Come on, Jesus. Did you notice that? I mean, I stopped on the side of the road and I gave somebody a couple dollars. Jesus, did you see that? Nobody else behind me didn't. I did. Jesus, I was driving through the drive-thru and the Holy Spirit came upon me and I paid for the person's order behind me. Did you see that, Jesus? See, the posture that we see here with Ruth, what have I done? I wonder if it's the same posture that we have. Or do we have a little bit of a sense of entitlement? And then Boaz, he answers her. I love it. It says, everything that you have done for your mother-in-law since your husband's death has been fully reported. Meaning like, I've been asking questions. I've been asking around how you left your father and mother in the native land and how you came to a people you didn't previously know. May the Lord reward you for what you have done. And may you receive a full reward from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come for refuge. Then she says, my Lord, I have found favor with you, for you have comforted and encouraged your servant, although I'm not like one of your female servants. So not only does Boaz provide provision for her, right? Remember, like, stay in my field. Stay with my female servants. Like Boaz was kind of acting, and any of you, like your first day of your new job, like you have a supervisor that kind of takes you around and shows you where everything's at. Like here's this room, here's where you're gonna be, here's the break room here. That's kind of what Boaz did, right? He kind of shows, hey, you can come get your water here, you follow the female servants here, you don't go to any other field, you stay within this right here. That's what Boaz did. But not only did he provide for her, like from the provision standpoint, he also blesses her with words. Did you see it? And there's something about encouraging words. There's something about looking at someone in the eye and honoring them, which is why another one of our values is intentional honor. Neighboring, yes, we want to be a great neighbor. You are where you are on purpose, but we also want to honor other people. We want to be known as people who encourage others, not bring them down, lift them up. And Boaz doesn't have to say this to Ruth. I mean, it's his land that she's on. He's the one with the status in society. She can do nothing for him, yet he chooses to speak words of affirmation. You ever have someone just out of nowhere just say something encouraging or positive to you? You didn't deserve it. You didn't expect it. It wasn't like you did something first and you're kind of like, well, now they have to say something to me. Man, doesn't it feel good? Man, you look lovely today. Man, there's just something about you, man. You're just radiating the love of Jesus. And the way that you talk to that other person, man, it was so encouraging to me. Like there's something about not like blowing smoke, but like really not brown nosing. Encouragement, intentional honor. And Boaz, what I think he's showing us is he's again showing us Ruth's grace, integrity, humility. Right, I said, one of the first things I said, I think maybe the first week we were in Ruth, is that Ruth wasn't living with the prototypical Israelite family. Like Elimelech and Naomi and the two boys, they weren't exactly like missionary family. They were leaving Bethlehem to move to a place they were told not to go. And yet, even in that environment, Ruth saw something different about the God that they served and said, I want that. And now we're seeing it lived out. We're seeing it lived out. We're seeing other people take notice of this incredible Moabite woman, which I think is a lesson for us. You might think that other people aren't watching. You might not think that other people are paying attention to how you live. You might not think that somebody's paying attention to how you work, but they are. I mean, any of you like people watching? Like going to the airport, we got some weirdos in this world, right? They crazy. You just watch people and you're like, what? You know, or maybe you like the mall, you go here and you're just like, what? I just love to watch people. But here's the thing. If you're watching them, who's to say they aren't watching you? You just think you're the only one that's not being watched? You know, I go, man, you'd be crazy. That person's probably looking at me being like, you're the crazy one. They're paying attention. How you live matters. How you treat others matters. How generous you are matters. You see, Boaz has noticed Ruth. And he says, may the Lord reward you for what you've done. But notice that he doesn't just say reward. He also says, may he also be the one that provides refuge for you. May he be the one, may Yahweh, God be the one that you find refuge, comfort, a place to be you. See, Ruth, she left family, friends, she left everything that was familiar, trusting in the grace and power of the Lord. And although I'm sure there were multiple times where Ruth was thinking, how is he providing again? I don't know how this looks. As they're journeying back to Bethlehem, what we see here is the Lord providing refuge in a way for Ruth that she never imagined. I just want to go out and maybe, just maybe, will I find favor. She's found more than just favor with Boaz. And then Ruth responds to Boaz like she's responded to so many things, right? 13, my Lord, I have found favor with you, for you have comforted and encouraged your servant, although I'm not like any of your female servants. This is the second time we've seen the word favor in chapter 2, right? In the very beginning and now in verse 13. See, her posture in this moment when finding this favor isn't, it's about time. It's about time. Like I left Moab expecting something like this to happen, and it's about time. Why did it take so long, God? No. Her response is, what have I done to deserve this? Who am I? I think the takeaway for us this morning in these first 13 verses of chapter 2 is when we respond the way that Ruth has responded here. Like, is this the posture that we would bring? Is this the tone that we would have? Like as we come to others, but obviously before God, is that the tone that we would have? Is that how you approach God? or when things aren't going the way that you want them to go, when things aren't going the way that you expected them to go, God, how dare you? Remember, it's easy. Ruth the Moabite, remember her situation. This is why the author comes back to that over and over again. The Moabite, her life has not been perfect. She's lost a husband. I can't tell you how long she's talked to her family. And this is still the way she responds. I want us to come back to the illustration of the split screen. I want you to think about it. We see what God is doing and how God is working. Ruth, on the other hand, doesn't always get to see things from the perspective that you and I get to see. We see God moving, and if you've read ahead at all, you know what God does. Ruth, in the midst of this, doesn't have a clue what's gonna happen. But God's doing his thing. He has his story. So let's make it personal for you and for me. You may be in life right now thinking to yourself, God, I don't know if I can handle this anymore. God, the situation that I'm in, like, it's just too much. And you can't see the split screen of what God is doing. And he's wanting you to be faithful. He's wanting you to press on, just like Ruth said to Naomi, hey, let me go out and glean. Let me go out and do the thing that God has set up. Let me just continue to take one step of faith, one foot in front of the other. I think I just want to say to you and me, you don't know what God is doing. Ruth doesn't either, but he's still working. He's still moving. Any of you read just an incredible biography of someone, and you think to yourself, sorry, you've never read, Rach, it's fine. But you think to yourself, I want to have that type of faith. That's the faith I want to have. But have you ever stopped to ask yourself, what was it like for that person in the moment? Like, you get to see the split screen. You get to see things from a different perspective. But have you ever looked and gone, I wonder what it was like for them? Friends, I think I just want to remind us that God is moving. I want you and I to be faithful in what he is asking us to do right now, not knowing what he's about to do next. And I know it can be difficult. I've been in those situations. I've been in those seasons of life where you go, I want it to stop. I need a break. And maybe, just maybe, God's wanting to do something with you, wanting to do something in you that you couldn't fathom for yourself until, like Ruth, you come in the posture of humility and grace. God, whatever you want to do, I'm here. Because I know that you're worth it. I know that you're worth it. Let's pray.